Jacob Miller had lived on his farm for over 20 years. He had inherited the land from his father, who had taught him the value of hard work and generosity. Life as a farmer wasn't easy. Every season brought its own struggles. Sometimes the rains didn't come on time, and sometimes they came too much. There were years of bountiful harvests and years of painful losses. Yet, through it all, Jacob remained steadfast. He wasn't a rich man, at least not in the way society defined wealth. His farmhouse was small and old, but it was filled with warmth. His clothes were simple, often stained with dirt from long hours in the fields. But what he lacked in material wealth, he made up for with a heart full of kindness. Millfield was a quiet town where most people knew each other. The local market was the heart of the community, where farmers like Jacob sold their produce. He had regular customers, families, restaurant owners, and even the local school that bought vegetables for their cafeteria. Despite his struggles, Jacob always kept his prices fair. Some people in town called him too soft, saying he should charge more, but Jacob didn't believe in greed. That night, after giving the vegetables to the hungry family, he sat on his porch, sipping tea and staring at the vast fields before him. The stars twinkled overhead, and the cool night breeze carried the distant sounds of crickets. He thought about the woman and her children, wondering how many other families in town were silently suffering. The economy had been tough lately. Factories had closed, and jobs were scarce. Many people who once lived comfortably were now struggling to afford food. The realization made Jacob's heart heavy. He wished there was more he could do. The next morning, as he prepared to head to the market, he saw an envelope tucked under his front door. Puzzled, he picked it up and opened it. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for your kindness. The world needs more people like you." There was no name, no signature, just those heartfelt words. Jacob smiled softly. He wasn't looking for gratitude, but it warmed his heart to know that his small act had meant something. He had no idea that this simple moment was just the beginning of something much bigger. Jacob went about his day as usual, loading his truck with crates of vegetables and heading to the local market. The morning air was crisp, and the scent of fresh produce filled the streets. Vendors were setting up their stalls, exchanging greetings and laughter as they prepared for another busy day. As Jacob arranged his vegetables, he noticed a few familiar customers, but something felt different. People were looking at him, some whispering, others smiling warmly. A few even came up to shake his hand, thanking him for what he had done. "Morning, Jacob," said Martha, the owner of a small bakery down the street. "I heard about what you did last night." Jacob blinked in surprise. "What I did?" "The woman you helped, the one with the kids. She came by my shop early this morning, looking much happier than yesterday. She told me what you did for her." Jacob rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't a big deal. Just a little kindness." Martha shook her head. "Maybe to you, but to her, it meant the world. You gave them hope." As the morning went on, more people came by with similar words. Jacob wasn't sure how the story had spread so quickly, but he didn't dwell on it. His focus remained on his farm and ensuring he had enough to sell. By noon, just as he was about to pack up, he saw the same woman from the previous night approaching his stall. She had a different look this time. Her posture was straighter, her eyes brighter. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said. "My name is Emily. I was embarrassed to ask for help, but you didn't make me feel ashamed. My kids had a warm meal last night because of you." Jacob smiled kindly. "I'm glad to hear that, Emily. You don't owe me anything. Just take care of your little ones." "I will," she said. "But I also wanted you to know something. My neighbor saw what you did." She told others, and now, well, people are talking. Jacob frowned slightly. "Talking?" Emily nodded. "In a good way. The town has been struggling, and people needed to hear about something good for a change. Your kindness reminded them that we can look out for each other." Jacob appreciated her words, but he hadn't done anything special. To him, helping was just the right thing to do. That evening, as he returned home, he saw something unusual, a car parked near his farm gate. A young man in a suit stepped out, holding a notepad and a camera. "Are you Jacob Miller?" the man asked. Jacob hesitated. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is David Carter. I'm a reporter from the Millfield Gazette," the man said with a friendly smile. I'd love to talk to you about what you did last night. Jacob's brow furrowed. How did you hear about that? David chuckled. It's all over town. People are inspired by your generosity, and I think our readers would love to hear your story. Jacob scratched his head, feeling a little overwhelmed. He wasn't looking for attention. He had only done what his heart told him to. I don't know about that, son, Jacob said. I'm just a farmer, not some kind of hero. David smiled. Maybe, but in times like these, even small acts of kindness can mean a lot. Would you be willing to share your story? Jacob hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something told him that this was only the beginning of a much bigger journey. Jacob invited David into his modest home, offering him a seat at the worn wooden kitchen table. The farmhouse smelled of fresh-baked bread, and a pot of coffee simmered on the stove. David pulled out his notepad, eager to get started. So, Mr. Miller, tell me, what made you decide to give away your vegetables to that family? Jacob took a deep breath, his weathered hands wrapping around his coffee cup. I didn't really think about it. I saw someone who needed help, and I did what I could. It's how I was raised. David nodded, scribbling notes. But with times being so tough, most people wouldn't give away their goods for free. Jacob sighed. I know what it's like to struggle. Farming isn't easy. Some years, the crops fail, and you wonder how you'll make it through the winter. But I've always believed that when you have more than you need, you share. If I have enough to feed my own family, then why shouldn't I help someone else? David listened carefully, impressed by Jacob's sincerity. That's a rare mindset these days. Jacob chuckled. Maybe, but kindness doesn't cost much, does it? As they spoke, the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made Jacob glance toward the window. Another car was pulling in, then another. Confused, he stood and stepped onto the porch. To his surprise, a small crowd had gathered at the gate. Neighbors, shop owners, even a few people he didn't recognize. And among them were two men holding cameras. David smiled. Looks like word got out. Jacob frowned. What's going on? A woman stepped forward. It was Martha from the bakery. We heard a reporter was coming to talk to you. And we think people should know just how much you've done for this town. I haven't done anything special, Jacob said, shaking his head. Another voice chimed in. Maybe not to you, but to us it means a lot. David exchanged a glance with the camera crew. Actually, Jacob, you've caught the attention of more than just our local paper. A regional news station picked up the story. They want to feature you on tonight's news. Jacob's eyes widened. The news? That's not necessary. I'm just a farmer, not some kind of celebrity. That's exactly why people need to hear about you, David said. Stories like yours remind people that kindness still exists. The camera crew set up their equipment, and before Jacob could protest further, the interview began. David asked more questions about his farm, his life, and why he believed in helping others. Jacob answered honestly, his simple words carrying a depth that resonated with everyone listening. When the interview ended, the crowd applauded. Some even stepped forward to shake Jacob's hand. Emily and her children were among them, smiling brightly. Thank you again, Mr. Miller, she said softly. You have no idea how much you've changed our lives. Jacob gave a small nod, feeling a strange mixture of humility and pride. He hadn't expected any of this. That night, as he sat in his living room, he turned on the TV. Sure enough, there he was, his weathered face on the screen, his words about kindness playing for thousands to hear. He never imagined that one small act could ripple out so far, and he had no idea that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Jacob woke up to something unusual, his phone ringing off the hook. He barely used the old landline, but now it wouldn't stop buzzing. Rubbing his eyes, he picked it up. Hello? Mr. Miller. A cheerful voice rang through the receiver. This is Karen Porter from Channel 7 News. We ran your story last night, and the response has been overwhelming. People all over the state are talking about you. Jacob blinked, still half asleep. Talking about me? Yes. We've been receiving calls from viewers who want to help. Some want to donate to struggling families in your town. Others are asking how they can support your farm. Jacob sat up straighter. Support my farm? That's right. Karen continued. Your story has touched people. They want to buy your produce, donate to your efforts, and even volunteer to help expand your work. What you did for that family, it's inspiring. Jacob rubbed his forehead. This was getting bigger than he ever imagined. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm just a small farmer. I don't know much about organizing donations. Well, you might want to start thinking about it, Karen said with a chuckle. Because whether you planned for it or not, you've started something special. After hanging up, Jacob stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. The farm was quiet, the golden sun peeking over the fields. He had always been content with his simple life, but now it seemed like something bigger was unfolding. Later that day, as he loaded his truck for the market, more surprises awaited him. When he arrived in town, a group of people stood by his stall, waiting. Some were customers, but others held cameras, notebooks, and microphones. A young woman in a business suit approached. Mr. Miller? I'm Rachel from the State Farmers Association. I saw your story and wanted to meet you in person. We'd love to offer you a grant to expand your farm and continue your community efforts. Jacob stared. A grant? You mean money? She nodded. Yes, we support farmers who contribute to their communities. With a little investment, you could grow more crops, hire help, and feed even more families in need. Jacob exhaled, feeling overwhelmed. This was all moving so fast. He had always worked alone, planting and harvesting with his own two hands. Now people were offering him money, support, and volunteers. Was he ready for this? As he stood there, a small voice interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Miller? Jacob turned to see Emily's son, the same little boy who had been hungry just days ago. He held out a small crumpled piece of paper. What's this, son? Jacob asked gently. It's from my mama, the boy said, smiling. Jacob unfolded the note. Dear Mr. Miller, you fed my children when we had nothing. I don't have much to give, but I want you to know that your kindness changed our lives. Because of you, I've found the strength to keep going. Thank you. Jacob felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the boy, who was grinning up at him. In that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about his farm anymore. This was about something much bigger than himself. He turned to Rachel, the woman offering the grant. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's talk about how we can make this work. The crowd erupted into applause. Jacob Miller had always been a simple farmer, but now he was something more, an example of how one act of kindness could change lives. And he was ready to see just how far it could go. Weeks passed, and Jacob's farm became the heart of something much bigger than he ever imagined. With the grant money, he expanded his fields, growing a wider variety of vegetables. Volunteers arrived from neighboring towns, eager to help. Some were fellow farmers, others were students, families, even retirees who simply wanted to be part of something meaningful. Word continued to spread, and soon, more donations poured in. A local grocery store pledged to buy his produce at a fair price, ensuring he could sustain his farm while still giving to those in need. A restaurant in town even offered to use his vegetables, featuring a special menu item called Miller's Harvest, with a portion of the proceeds going to feed struggling families. But for Jacob, the biggest reward wasn't the attention or the support. It was the change he saw in the people around him. One afternoon, as he walked through the fields inspecting his crops, he spotted Emily and her children. They were kneeling in the dirt, carefully planting seedlings. You didn't have to come all the way out here, Jacob said, smiling as he approached. Emily stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. I wanted to. Her son grinned up at him. Mama says we should give back when we can. Jacob felt warmth spread through his chest. That's a good lesson. Emily looked around the farm, taking in the sight of volunteers working together. You know, Mr. Miller, when you gave us those vegetables, you didn't just feed us. You gave us hope. Jacob nodded, his throat tight. Hope. That was what this had all become about. As the sun dipped low over the farm, casting golden light over the fields, Jacob reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. He had never set out to be a hero. He wasn't a wealthy man or a powerful businessman. He was just a farmer, a man with a small piece of land and a willingness to share what he had. But sometimes, that was enough to start something extraordinary. As he watched the children laughing in the fields, the volunteers working side by side, and the crops growing strong, Jacob understood one simple truth. One act of kindness could change a life, and sometimes it could change the world.